What do you do when you encounter a storm? Well, stay tuned to hear what Jesus did when he encountered a storm in this next teaching session. Shalom and welcome to this teaching session about learning a story from the Bible in the context of the land of Israel. In fact, our story today that we want to pay attention to in the great details that are part of this narrative mentioned in Mark 4, it actually happened right here on the Sea of Galilee. And this story involves Jesus and his disciples. Now, in the context of being fearful of this storm that rose without warning, it's Jesus who brought peace to the lives of these followers of him. These disciples, even some of these disciples were seasoned fishermen themselves and understood the dynamics of this small lake, if you will, this fresh water lake called the Sea of Galilee. But we're going to take a look at the details of this story, not only where it took place, but some life lessons that we can learn along the way, in particular about God's sovereignty and his care for us. So let's take a look at Mark chapter 4. So God cares for the entire world, and he also cares for this small country called Israel. This is where our story takes place today from Mark 4, specifically the storm narrative involving Jesus and his disciples. This northern part of the land is where the story took place, most likely here in the northwest corner of the lake. I call it a lake even though the Bible refers to this body of water as the Sea of Galilee. As we fly over the Sea of Galilee, it's 13 miles long and maybe 6.5 wide at its widest point. It's a fresh water lake. In fact, here from the northeast corner, you can see the southern end, as well as the western coastline, including Tiberias, Magdala, Capernaum, Chorazim, Bethsaida is here on the north side. A city called Cursi is over here on the east side. The length again is about 13 miles. Jesus would have used this valley, called the Valley of the Doves today, oftentimes on his way from Nazareth into the Sea of Galilee area and around to Capernaum, which is about right there. He would have passed these cliffs of Arbel. He would have traveled across the plains of Gennesaret, including right past Magdala, a first century city where Mary Magdalene was from. As we fly over at least portions of the Sea of Galilee in this drone video, we'll see the beautiful sunrise. I would think Jesus would have seen similar sunrises like this on the lake here on the western side. The sun is rising over the Golan Heights. This northwest side of the lake is where Capernaum is located. You can see Capernaum right in front of us. Bethsaida is on the north side. And Chorazin, the third city in this triplet of cities condemned by Jesus incidentally in Matthew 11. the eastern side. In fact, this is where disciples and Jesus were sailing towards the eastern side as the winds faced them. And yet here from Hippos or Sosita, one of the Decapolis cities, on the east side of the lake, you can see again the length of this Sea of Galilee, including the western side and the city of Tiberias today. Sorry that this drone video is a little choppy today. So this is the context, and certainly when the eastern winds called Sharkia blow from the east, from the deserts of Jordan and even beyond, it causes whitecaps. This was the type of wind that the disciples and Jesus encountered in Mark 4. A couple of years ago, we were body surfing on 3 and 4 foot waves here on the western shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. And to add to the context of the story, could you imagine Jesus and his disciples crowded in a boat like this? This is a boat that was discovered in 1986 off the shores of a kibbutz called Naf Ginosar, made of about a dozen types of wood, which means that this most likely was repaired oftentimes. But picture the disciples and Jesus in a boat like this when we read this story. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." This would be the eastern side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, normally this is what the lake looks like, even on a windy afternoon when winds would blow from the west. We're looking straight south, by the way, but this was an encounter that forced these seasoned disciples, some of them fishermen, to be afraid, to the point where they even doubted that Jesus cared for them. And yet Jesus gets up, he calms the wind and the waves, and says, "Peace, be still." It's a remarkable example of God's sovereignty, displayed here in the authority that Jesus had even over nature, and yet the care and compassion that Jesus exemplified as well. It's Peter who would later tell us these words, "Cast your cares upon him, for he cares for you." So I think we can now picture these disciples in this small boat, similar to the one that was found in 1986, and in the midst of the storm, they experience God's peace. The sovereignty that Jesus displays, his power over nature to bring an end to the winds and the waves that buffeted this boat tremendously. God still works through his sovereign will and plan for our lives, and he still is in the business of caring for us and bringing us peace as well. You know, I just read a couple quotes on God's sovereignty as we talk about this in this lesson today. I like what R.C. Sproul once said, "There is not one piece of cosmic dust that is outside the scope of God's sovereignty." John Piper also mentioned this. The presence of hope and the invincible sovereignty of God is what drives out our fear. So if you are feeling fearful today or anxious about the coronavirus or a situation in your life or something that's out of your control, I hope that you come back here to the waters of the Sea of Galilee and learn this lesson that the disciples did firsthand with Jesus in the boat actually with them. It's these disciples who experienced the peace of God. So may you also experience God's peace and rest and comfort and care in your crisis of life today. Until next time, shalom.